Hello, listeners. Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be talking about Swedish superstar Ingrid Bergman. I'm fighting off a bit of a cold, so hopefully my voice doesn't sound too bad. Ingrid Bergman was born on August 29, 1915, in Stockholm, Sweden, to Justus and Friedel Bergman. I do want to say really quick at the top here that one of my sources was a documentary called Ingrid in Her Own Words, directed by Stig Bjorkman. It was made in 2015 and includes in-depth interviews from all of Ingrid's children, as well as Ingrid herself, and Ingrid's own words from her diary entries and letters, and tons of photos and home video footage. It's really, really remarkable if you are a fan of hers. You really get a glimpse into her personal life, so I highly recommend checking it out. So on to her story. Actually, Ingrid's parents' story is really sweet. Justus was a free-spirited painter, barely scraping by, but insanely loving life. Money wasn't what was important to him. Experiences and happiness were. He traveled as much as his modest earnings could afford him, painting his way through Europe. While vagabonding his way through Germany, he met Friedel, who was a teenager 13 years younger than him. She was enraptured by his paintings, and the two very quickly fell head over heels in love. But Friedel's parents did not like this. When the two lovebirds declared that they were going to get married, her parents forbade it. A poor, free-spirited artist was not good enough for their little girl, and since she was still a teenager, their word ruled. But Justus wasn't letting his soulmate disappear into the fading past that easily. He loved Friedel so much that he changed his entire lifestyle for her. He was going to prove to her parents that he was good enough for their daughter, and that he loved her so much he would work hard and patiently await the moment when he could prove that he would be a good husband to her. So Justus opened a photography business, a business that would actually make a reliable income, and it did. In fact, he created a really successful business out of it. He worked his butt off for 7 long years and saved every single penny he could during that time. Well, whatever the Swedish equivalent of a penny is. 7 years after Friedel's parents told him he was not good enough for their daughter and forced the end of their romance, Justus showed up at their home and simply handed his bank book to Friedel's father. How could he say no to this? Not only did Justus prove that he was willing to earn a good living to support a family, but he proved just how much he loved Friedel. Love won, and the two were married on June 13, 1907, and made a home in Sweden. They were so happy and so in love. They sadly lost 2 babies during their infancies in the first few years of their marriage. It was heartbreaking for the couple, but when they welcomed a baby girl in 1915, their faith was renewed and their family was complete. Baby Ingrid. She was the miracle that they needed. As you can imagine, baby Ingrid Bergman was adorable. Her photographer father took tons of photographs of her, something that wasn't so accessible to everyone. He adored his little girl so much. They both did. I wish I could say they all lived happily ever after, but I can't. We should be getting used to this by now. The happy young family deserved so much out of life, but that sadly wasn't their fate. When Ingrid was only 2.5 years old, her mother Friedel became very sick with jaundice. All the love in the world wasn't enough to save her. She passed away, leaving a heartbroken husband and a young daughter behind. Justus had lost the love of his life, and Ingrid lost her mother so young that she would later not remember her at all. This devastating loss brought the father and daughter together even closer. Ingrid and her father were a team. Even with the rough start with Friedel's parents, Justus still brought Ingrid to Germany to spend summers with her mother's family every year. She especially loved her time with her mother's sister, Aunt Elsa. It sounds like Aunt Elsa spoiled her rotten, and they had a really lovely relationship. Elsa was the cool aunt that every little girl needs, especially a little girl who had lost her mother. When Ingrid was 9 years old, in comes a hot new nanny named Greta into their lives. As cliche as can be, Justus fell in love with the nanny, and he wanted to marry her. But not surprisingly, Friedel's parents didn't want him marrying her either. Justus must have been such a caring and compassionate man, because even though his in-laws really should have zero say in his love life 7 years after his wife's death, he respected their wishes and didn't marry Greta. No word on whether he had to find a new nanny or if they all just went on super awkwardly together. Ingrid recalled later in life, quote, "I had a wonderful childhood. I believed that my life with my father was perfect," end quote. But that happiness wouldn't last. Her father became very ill when Ingrid was 13 years old, and his health deteriorated rapidly. He had stomach cancer. In a diary entry from April of 1928, 13-year-old Ingrid wrote, quote, God, my God, help Papa. Dear God, you can do anything, so please make Papa well. Make me calm. God, I beg you, help me and make Papa well. Don't abandon us, God in heaven. Amen. End quote. That is heartbreaking. She wanted more than anything in the whole entire world for her father to live. She didn't want to lose her only surviving parent, her best friend. She needed a miracle. But sadly, Justus Bergman died early in 1929 when Ingrid was only 13 years old. Imagine being 13 years old and having lost both of your parents. The same year her father died, Ingrid's friend Maud passed away. Then her grandfather passed away. Then an aunt, uncle, and cousin died in an accident. All of this loss happened within the year of 1929. It was just so much devastation. She said in an interview later in life, quote, I was a sad child and very lonely, and I think that is how I saved myself, to invent the characters that I would talk to because I was terribly shy. Shy in school, shy with anybody. And if I had all of these imaginary characters around me, I could talk to them. And that is how I became an actress. I was so happy to get out of the reality and come into my world of imagination, end quote. A tale we hear all too often. Ingrid would eventually become the head of her school's drama club. She spent the remainder of her childhood being passed around between various family members. Some time was spent with cool Aunt Elsa, but she wasn't able to care for Ingrid full-time. Ingrid's entire existence of her first 13 years of life had been an adventure with her free-spirited father. Life had always been fun and exciting. Now, under the care of her mother's more serious and rigid family, all the sparkle had dissipated from Ingrid's life. The details were a little fuzzy here, but a few years down the road, Ingrid was back in Sweden. And she bumped into her former nanny and almost stepmother Greta one day. Greta filled her in on what she was doing with her life, and Ingrid was intrigued. Greta was spending her days working as an extra in Swedish films, and Ingrid asked if Greta could get her into the action. She wanted a little of that sparkle back in her life, and motion pictures sounded like just the place to find it. After her very first day as an extra in a film, Ingrid knew without a doubt what she wanted to do in her life. This was it for her. She was currently living with her Uncle Otto and Aunt Hulda, and they did not want this life for her. They believed actresses were, quote, tainted women with bad reputations. They wanted her to become, you guessed it, a secretary. That is until she met a nice man with a good job who could support her. And then she could spend the rest of her life making meatloafs and having babies. The daughter of free-spirited, full-of-life Justice Bergman wasn't going to give into a life of predictability that easily, though. She pleaded with her uncle to allow her to pursue a life in films. She wanted to enroll in the Royal Dramatic Theatre School in Stockholm and train to become a great actress. Her persistence paid off. Uncle Otto finally relented and told Ingrid that she had one shot and one shot only at trying out for acceptance into the prestigious school. He figured this compromise would end the whole ordeal because the academy was so difficult to get into, there was no way Ingrid would make the cut. Well, guess what? He was wrong. She was accepted. While at the academy, Ingrid was set up on a blind date with a man about 8 years older than her, an already accomplished dentist who had plans to become a surgeon. His name was Petter Lindström, and the two were quickly in love and became inseparable. Ingrid landed her first film role in 1935 at the age of 20 in the film The Count of Monksbridge. This entrance into the Swedish film industry marked the beginning of her life as a screen star. And she was soon really well known and beloved on Swedish screens. With Ingrid's film career off and running, now it's her love life's turn. Petter proposed to her in 1936, and she said yes. And her mother's side of the family actually approved of him, probably because he was a doctor. Petter and Ingrid were married on March 1st, 1937. In early 1938, Ingrid dipped her toes into acting in German films. Kind of a bad time to be embarking on opportunities in Germany, Hitler and all, but she did it anyways. In fact, the director of that first German film, The Four Companions, drug her to a Hitler rally. As everyone in attendance dutifully and confidently raised their right arms and shouted "Hail," Ingrid did not. The director told her that it was in her best interest to follow the lead of everyone else and to not draw attention to herself. She disagreed. She wasn't going to hail Hitler. This was not the Germany where she spent her summers, and she did not support Hitler's message. Actually, Nazi Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels had taken notice of the Swedish beauty's portfolio of work. If he wanted her in more German films, she would more or less be owned by the Nazis. Luckily, when Goebbels met her in person, he thought she was too tall, so she was off the hook. She was 5'9" and he was only 5'5", so she towered over him. And I'm guessing Nazi big shots didn't like women towering over them. With that, Ingrid left with just that one German film credit and went home to Sweden. She wouldn't return to Germany again until after the war. Back home in Sweden with her husband Petter, she was preparing for her life to forever change. They were expecting a baby. Ingrid gave birth to a little girl they named Pia on September 20th, 1938. Little did she know when she welcomed little Pia into the world that her life was going to change even more drastically very soon. When Pia was only a few months old, Ingrid was approached by big-time American movie producer and studio mogul David O. Selznick to do an American remake of her Swedish film Intermezzo. Not only that, but she was offered a contract with Selznick International Pictures, a 7-year contract. She was offered $2,500 per week. Adjusted to today, that would be almost $56,000 per week. I'd take it. And she did, too. Ingrid knew she would live with the regret forever if she didn't jump on this opportunity. Part of her assumed she would go and do the one movie, they would realize she wasn't as amazing as they had hoped, and she would be back in Sweden by Pia's first birthday. Well, she was kind of right. She did the one movie and booked it back to Sweden even before the premiere. During her time in Hollywood, she had stayed at the Selznick home. She was painfully shy, but she said Irene Selznick, who was not only David O. Selznick's wife, but Louis B. Mayer's daughter, helped her, quote, understand this strange, fascinating world, end quote, in Hollywood. She was just so sure that they wouldn't want her to fulfill that contract after all. Plus, she missed her husband and her baby. So that's why she immediately returned to Sweden. But she was wrong. Selznick ordered her back to LA to continue making films. She and little Pia sailed back to the U.S. on the Queen Mary, and Petter joined them a little bit later. They first spent some time in New York while Ingrid awaited her first movie assignment. She took on a Broadway role while there, very eager to act. Ingrid loved New York City. She loved the bustling energy, the buildings, the arts. But when Petter arrived, he hated it. It was all too loud and too energetic for him. When they finally did make their way to LA, he was a little bit more comfortable there. Still, though, he yearned for his homeland of Sweden. But Petter spent most of his time during the first few years in America in Rochester, New York, in medical school. So Ingrid would spend a lot of time traveling back and forth between California and New York. Petter kept little Pia with him in New York until the family was finally able to be all together in California. Ingrid spent the first couple of years in her contract with Selznick appearing in a series of minor films. And then, in 1942, Selznick approached Ingrid and said he wanted to cast her in a film called Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart. She was hesitant at first because she was really hoping to star in Joan of Arc, which wasn't even in pre-production at all. But since there had been talks about it being done for a few years, she really wanted to remain available for it. That was her dream role. She was also hesitant because the pre-production of Casablanca was a shit show. The script wasn't final, it kept changing, and there wasn't a solid ending to the story yet. In fact, the ending wasn't known until it was almost time to film it. She did not want to be involved in such a messy production. Luckily for all of us, David O. Selznick convinced her to play the role of Ilsa, and the rest is history. Oh, and the entire filming of Casablanca remained a complete shit show. But that shit show resulted in one of the greatest movies of all time. Casablanca is a true classic. It is one of my favorite movies. But the stars of the movie thought otherwise. They hated it. They hated working on it, but it all worked out really great for them. Casablanca went on to win 3 Academy Awards in 1943, and it made Ingrid Bergman a movie star. She made such a splash that Ernest Hemingway, when his book For Whom the Bell Tolls was about to be made into a film, sent her a copy of the book with an inscription inside that read, quote, "You are the Maria in this book." But For Whom the Bell Tolls was being made by Paramount Pictures, and Ingrid Bergman was under contract with Selznick International Pictures. So Hemingway went to Selznick himself to persuade him to loan her out for the film, and he did. But Paramount had already cast one of their contracted players, Vera Zorina, for the role. But Ernest Hemingway used his powers of persuasion again at Paramount and convinced them to let her go and replace her with Ingrid Bergman. It had to be Ingrid Bergman. And she wanted it just as badly as Hemingway wanted it for her. When he told her that she'd have to cut off her hair for the role, she replied to him, quote, "To get that part, I'd cut my head off," end quote. For Whom the Bell Tolls was an even bigger hit than Casablanca, and it landed Ingrid Bergman her very first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Ingrid's next splash hit was also teenage Angela Lansbury's film debut, Gaslight, which received 7 Academy Award nominations in 1944. And one of those statuettes landed in the well-deserving hands of Ingrid Bergman. She was officially a Best Actress Oscar winner. Petter had been working hard since his arrival in the U.S. on his studies to get his American medical degree. And during Ingrid's filming of For Whom the Bell Tolls, he achieved that goal and was able to begin practicing medicine in California. The family was finally able to be reunited. Ingrid and Petter's marriage had seen some pretty extreme changes since their wedding day. She was young when they got married, a full life ahead of her. Now she was one of the biggest movie stars in America. He had changed careers, they had a child, and they all relocated to a brand new country with a brand new language and a brand new culture. And to top it off, Ingrid's stardom had hampered their privacy and any chance for a quiet life. Petter started to grow resentful, and it showed through in his behavior towards Ingrid. It bothered her so much that she suggested divorce. But, however resentful Petter was, he kind of liked some of the perks that came along with being married to a movie star. At the end of World War II, Ingrid Bergman traveled through Europe entertaining the troops. She couldn't believe what she saw. The devastation around her was absolutely shocking. She was left with an immense feeling of horror and guilt because she was half German. How could she come from the same people who could inflict this kind of destruction and hatred? She spent some time in Paris trying to decompress from the aftermath of the war that she had witnessed. And right there, in the City of Love, Ingrid Bergman fell in love. She met a war photographer named Robert Capa there, and the two had instant chemistry and spent every moment together until she had to leave for home. She begged him to join her in the U.S. She would leave her husband and they could be together. But he didn't want to settle down in America. He was a creative vagabond, kind of like her dad was. So they departed with wounded hearts. She went back to Hollywood and he continued his travels for his photography. 10 years later, Capa was in Vietnam photographing the realities of the war when he stepped on a landmine and died. Ingrid Bergman kept busy as a successful screen actress, and in the fall of 1946, she returned to Broadway for a production of Joan of Lorraine. This play is kind of like playing her dream role of Joan of Arc. It's about a group of then present-day actors who are rehearsing for a play of Joan of Arc, so it's kind of a play within a play. She played the actress who was playing Joan of Arc in the play of Joan of Lorraine, if that makes sense. And apparently she did it well because it won her a Tony Award. And then, after that Broadway production, her time finally arrived to play Joan of Arc on screen. Her biggest professional dream had come true, and she received an Oscar nomination for her work on the film. Her oldest daughter, Pia, reflected on her mother's lifelong love of the story of Joan of Arc. She said, quote, "I think of a young girl who hears a voice that says she's going to do remarkable things, that she's going to go into the world and be amazing, a poor peasant girl who has the calling to be heroic." End quote. She also did 3 films with famed director Alfred Hitchcock: Spellbound with Gregory Peck in 1945, Notorious with Cary Grant in 1946, and Under Capricorn with Joseph Cotten in 1949. Ingrid said Alfred Hitchcock gave her the best advice of her career. If you can't do it my way, fake it. In a letter to her friend Molly back in Sweden, Ingrid wrote, quote, "We're hard at work on Hitchcock's Notorious. He's so talented. Every day with him is pure happiness. He brings out the best in me. Things I never imagined I possessed. He mixes serious with humor and comedy and drama. I thought Cary Grant would be conceited and stuck up, but he's one of the nicest co-stars I've ever worked with." End quote. Ingrid Bergman's contract with Selznick Studios ended in 1947, and she was unsure what the next chapter of her life would hold. Then she stumbled upon a couple of Italian films written and directed by Roberto Rossellini, and she was mesmerized by his work. She set out to meet this Italian man of intrigue. She found him, and he was just as interested in working with her as she was with him. Getting Howard Hughes to finance a movie called Stromboli in Rome, Ingrid set off to film with her new idol, Roberto Rossellini, in late 1949. She kissed her husband and now 12-year-old daughter Pia goodbye and told them that she'd be home in a few weeks. She thought this to be true. But actually, it would be her final kiss with her husband, and she wouldn't see her daughter again for several years. Because she was about to fall in love with Roberto Rossellini. Ingrid and Roberto immediately embarked on a passionate love affair, and they didn't keep it much of a secret. News of their affair made it back to Hollywood very quickly, and a lot of the American public was very disappointed in her. She was disgraced all over the media, but that didn't sway her because she was in love. She sent a Dear John letter back to Petter and embarked on a new life with Roberto. Ingrid got pregnant immediately, and she gave birth to Ronaldo Roberto on February 2nd, 1950, a baby boy they called Robin. Ingrid secured a divorce from Petter soon after she had baby Robin. Oh, and Roberto was also married, so he went ahead and got a divorce too. Now they were free to get married themselves. 2 years later, on June 18, 1952, Ingrid and Roberto welcomed twin baby girls, Isabella and Ingrid. She had a new family now, and her first child, Pia, remained with Petter, who was granted custody. Ingrid tried to convince Petter to fly Pia to Italy to visit with her, but he wouldn't allow it. I guess I don't blame him. So then she decided she would fly to California to visit her, but Roberto Rossellini wouldn't allow that, so she was stuck. It turned out Roberto was quite controlling. Aside from him not allowing Ingrid to travel to the U.S. to see her own child, he also forbade her from working in anyone else's films, only his. She wanted to cement herself as a distinguished Italian movie star, but he had a tight grip on her career aspirations. And Rossellini's films were not very well received. Ingrid said they were not bad films, but the love scandal just took over and swayed everyone's opinions of their films. Ingrid returned to Sweden and returned to the stage when she performed in a production of her beloved Joan of Arc in Stockholm. It was very special for her to perform her favorite story to her native people. Ingrid's American agent back in LA was trying to keep her name alive in the US. A lot of people thought pretty poorly of her now, mostly for ditching her daughter for a new life. In fact, U.S. Senator Edwin C. Johnson said she was, quote, one of the most powerful women on earth. I regret to say, a powerful influence for evil, end quote. And also, quote, an apostle of degradation, end quote, because of her behavior. I wonder if he would have said the same things if it was a man. Her agent was able to secure the American release of Ingrid's 1956 movie Anastasia, which was filmed in Europe. Enough Americans must have been able to overlook their personal views of Ingrid Bergman because it was very well received and earned her another Oscar. Still unwilling or unable to return to the U.S., Cary Grant accepted the award on her behalf at the Academy Awards ceremony. Pia turned 18 in September of 1956, and now that she was a legal adult, she wanted to go see her mother. So she flew to Italy to be reunited with her mom, the mom she hadn't seen in 6 years. They had both grown and changed in those 6 years. Ingrid last saw her daughter when she was a child, and now she was a young woman who had half-siblings that she had never met. Roberto's treatment of his wife was getting worse with each passing year, and he was having affairs on top of his controlling behavior towards Ingrid. It all came to a head in 1957 when he got another woman pregnant. The marriage was over after 7 years. The tricky part now was that her 3 children with Roberto Rossellini were Italian citizens, and Ingrid wanted to return to the United States. So now she had to be separated from her children again. For the remainder of their childhoods, Ingrid split her time between the US and Europe for film roles so she could ensure time with her children in Italy. After her divorce from Roberto, Ingrid immediately fell in love with what would quickly become husband number 3. His name was Lars Schmidt, and get this, he owned a private island off the coast of Sweden. Ingrid married Lars in 1958 when she was 43 years old. She finally made her way back to Hollywood later that same year, ready to face her critics. Instead of Cary Grant accepting an award for her, he had the honor of introducing her onto the stage of the 1958 Academy Awards ceremony as a presenter. She did not know what to expect when she walked out onto that stage, but to her great relief, what she received was a standing ovation. History repeating itself, when Ingrid's twins turned 18, they left Italy for the United States to be with their mother and older half-sister. Ingrid's daughter, Isabella Rossellini, would go on to have a successful modeling and acting career of her own. Ingrid Bergman stayed busy with film work, and she snagged her 3rd Academy Award when she was 59 years old for her role in 1974's Murder on the Orient Express. Sadly, the year prior to Murder on the Orient Express, Ingrid was diagnosed with breast cancer. Even so, despite the treatments and the effect the disease had on her body, she continued to work. Ingrid and Lars's marriage ended in 1975 after 17 years. In 1982, she starred in the TV movie A Woman Called Golda, about the iconic female prime minister of Israel. She was extremely proud to portray Golda Meir on screen. So proud that she worked through the extreme pain and fatigue she silently experienced while filming as her cancer spread throughout her body. Even through her pain, she traveled to Israel to prepare for this role. She interviewed anyone she could who had known Golda, and she studied hours of newsreels of her to make sure that she had her mannerisms mastered. She did all of this while dying of cancer. Ingrid Bergman's performance earned her an Emmy nomination. Just a few months after the release of A Woman Called Golda, Ingrid Bergman succumbed to the cancer that had overtaken her body. She died on her 67th birthday, on August 29, 1982. Her ashes were scattered at sea off the coast of Sweden, her home. She won that Emmy Award for her work on Golda, but she would never know. Her oldest daughter, Pia, accepted the Emmy Award for her mother. Pia said of her mother, quote, "She was a very funny, warm, and open person. Nobody ever disliked our mother," end quote. Those who did dislike her had obviously never met her personally. It's really easy to dislike from afar. Ingrid Bergman said earlier in her life, quote, "If you took acting away from me, I'd stop breathing," end quote. And she acted until the very end. Now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Ingrid Bergman was fluent in 5 languages: Swedish, German, English, Italian, and French. Bullet point number 2. A lot of male actors were really intimidated by working with her because of her 5'9" stature. You might remember that Humphrey Bogart had to have blocks on his shoes while filming Casablanca. Bullet point number 3. We all know how much studio execs during the 30s and 40s loved to recreate their newly contracted actresses. You know, new face, new hair, new body, new name. Well, when David O. Selznick told Ingrid Bergman as she signed her contract that he wanted to change her name, cap her teeth, and reshape her eyebrows, she said no and threatened to return to Sweden. She didn't like glamour and she didn't like makeup. She loved simplicity. He compromised in order to keep her. Bullet point number 4. That love affair Ingrid had with war photographer Robert Capa? Alfred Hitchcock used the tragic story as an inspiration for his Grace Kelly film Rear Window, Capa's profession as a photographer. Bullet point number 5. Speaking of Alfred Hitchcock, Ingrid and her husband were regular dinner guests at Hitchcock's home because, as it turned out, he had a raging crush on her. Bullet point number 6. Ingrid disliked her experience on the set of Casablanca so much, and the film as a whole compared to her countless other films, that when someone would approach her and tell her how much they loved her in Casablanca, she would look at them like she had no idea what they were talking about. Bullet point number 7. In 1983, on the first anniversary of her passing, Ingrid Bergman was honored at the Venice Film Festival. Some of the stars who came out to pay tribute to her were Olivia de Havilland, Gregory Peck, Audrey Hepburn, Walter Matthau, Charlton Heston, and Prince Albert of Monaco. In conclusion, Ingrid Bergman was a child who experienced great sadness and escaped her reality into a life of make-believe. Her imagination guided her through a painful childhood and straight into a life of acting. And through acting, she could always escape herself and her shyness and enter into brand new worlds. Ingrid was never able to stay in one frame of life for too long. As she recalled, quote, "It's like a bird of passage has always lived inside of me. Since I was tiny, I've always longed for something new and different. I have seen so much, but it is never enough. I've tried to put up with daily sadness and be happy. I never understood the kind of happiness that I was longing for," end quote. She described how she would attain the happiness she thought she was looking for, but it would soon become ordinary and she would long for something new and exciting. She had her father's adventure-seeking, free-spirited personality. She loved life and she wanted a life of substance. All 4 of Ingrid's children missed their time away from their mother during their childhoods. But none of them are resentful for that in adulthood. As children, they felt sadness. As adults, they understand. They understand who she was. We wish we had more of her. We missed her presence. I craved my whole life to have more of her, Pia said. She said she was so much fun and so amusing to be around. How could they ever be angry at her? Ingrid had lost her own mother when she was only 2 years old. She was passed around between other female family members after her father's death. She never had a mother to show her how to be a mother herself. Ingrid Bergman was always reaching for tomorrow's happiness. She was full of love, adventure, and dreams. She was completely present in every moment of her life. Sometimes that was at the cost of those she loved, but when she was there completely. Throughout her entire life, Ingrid loved being behind a camera. Her father had instilled in her a great appreciation for the power of memories, of how important it was to document life and save moments of your life to always have as memories. Ingrid saved letters, photos, films, newspapers, keepsakes of all kinds. She kept the things that she treasured most, so she could always relive those moments. Her life story was important to her, the good parts and the bad. Thank you, Ingrid Bergman, for showing us how to treasure the past. Thank you for showing us how to be present in the now. And thank you for showing us how to reach for tomorrow. And thank you all for listening. My main source for this episode was the book titled Ingrid Bergman, A Life from Beginning to End by the Hourly History series. I also watched the incredible documentary titled Ingrid Bergman in Her Own Words, directed by Stig Bjorkman. Also, History.com, Biography.com, an article in Closer from February 2nd, 2020, and my trusted sidekick, IMDB.